Welcome to part two of creating basic queries based on Microsoft Access the Basics book. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to create queries based on related tables and how adding a related table affects the output of the query. Now, by this point, you probably have an idea that queries are extremely powerful. In fact, the more you learn about queries, you'll learn that really they become the basis of almost everything that you do within Access. They can become the basis of forms and also reports. And as I mentioned in the previous video, the real power of queries is that they always analyze the data based on the current status of the data. So the query that you have right now, when you open it up later, it will show you the results based on the data that's in the table or tables right then. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started back to the library database. All right, so I've opened up the library database, and we see in this library database the two queries that I created in the previous video, part one of creating queries. We have the patrons in Idaho, and then the patrons whose library card expires in the next 60 days. Let me just review those very briefly here. If I go into the design view of the patrons in Idaho query, we see that the only criteria that I have is in the state field, I have ID. Remember, I used ID because I don't have Idaho spelled out, I just have the abbreviation. Also notice the quotation marks. If I'm going to type a query, criteria, usually Access will add the quotation marks for me, but if I'm going to go in here and edit, for instance, and change this to Washington, I need to make sure that those quotation marks stay there. Okay, also, we created the query of patrons whose library card is going to expire in the next 60 days, and we did that using the date function. So we have between date and date plus 60. And remember that date function updates based on whatever the current date is. We will actually use the date function again in the couple of queries that we're going to create now. All right, so I'm going to create a query, and this is going to be based on a related table. So I would like to choose query design again. Now notice over here, it's showing me a list of the queries that I have, not the tables. Well, that's easy to change, but you're probably getting an idea that you can create a query based on a query, and we'll cover that in a more advanced lesson here. So I'm going to go back to show a list of tables, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in the patrons by double-clicking. In this case, I'm really only interested in the patron's name, so I'm just going to double-click on first name and double-click on last name. Now, before I add the related table, I'm going to view the result of this query. And notice that I have the names for each and every patron that is in the patrons table. Again, not very much data in here, but we have 11 unique records. Now, watch what happens when I add the related table. Now, the table that is directly related to this is the checkout history. So I'll double click on checkout history. We have the relationship created, which we talked about in an earlier lesson on how to create the relationships here. We have patrons and checkout history linked based on the patron's card number. Well, now if I view the result of this query, I'm going to see a completely different result. Instead of seeing 11 unique patrons, I only see 3. I see Sally, Bill, and Felicia. Now notice that Sally and Bill and Felicia all appear multiple times. The reason that happened is because they have multiple records in the checkout history. That simply means they've checked out more than one book. Now, I do not see several other patrons here because those patrons, at least according to this database, have never, ever checked out a book. Now, to make this make a little bit more sense, I'm going to go ahead and add the books table. Now, the books table is linked to the checkout history based on book ID. Now, I'm going to go ahead and add some fields here. I'm going to add the date that the book was checked out, the date that it was due, and the date that it was checked in. And finally, I'm also going to add the title of the book. Now, when I view the query result, this makes a little bit more sense. Bill shows up a couple of times because he's checked out a couple of books. And Sally shows up a couple of times, and Felicia shows up 3 or 4 times here, 3 times because she has checked out multiple books. Well, I don't have any criteria, but by just adding those related fields, I did limit who displays on this particular query result. Now, what I'd like to do in this case is I would like to see a list of all of the patrons who have books that are not yet checked in. Well, the field that allows me to do that is the date that the book was checked in. And I'm just going to increase the width of this field so that I can see it a little bit better here and realize that that is the name of the field here. Okay, I'm going to add a criteria that will show me the books that have not yet come in. In other words, they're still checked out. Obviously, Excel for Dummies and how to choose a cat. Well, notice that there's something unique about that field. The books that are still checked out don't have anything in the date checked in. So the criteria I'm going to add in this case is null or is empty. Nothing there. Now when I go back and view the result of the query, guess what I see? Just the books that are currently checked out that have not yet been checked in. Well, I'm happy with this, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to call this books currently checked out. And I can use that query anytime I want to see a list of books that are currently checked out. Okay, well now maybe I want to see a list of all of the patrons that have been late, that haven't brought their books in on time. Well, I could actually use this query as a starting point, or I can create a new one. And just for practice, we'll go ahead and create a new query again. So we'll go ahead and go to Create. We'll choose Query Design. I'll change it to Tables again. I'll start once again with the patrons table. I know I'm going to need these other tables to find the patrons that have been late and the books that have been late. So I'll add the checkout history by double-clicking on that table and also adding books. I'll add the same fields, first name, last name by double-clicking on each of those, the date it was checked out, the date that it was due, and the date that it came back in, and let's add the title so we understand what book we're talking about. Now notice in this case I accidentally clicked too many times. To get rid of that field, I can just click on the title, the column heading there, and hit the delete key. Okay, we'll click View, and there's the books. Now, the books that I'm particularly interested in, or the ones I want to see, are the ones that have been checked in after the due date. And I really only see one. Of course, in a real situation, there would be multiple ones, I'm sure, here. But I'm going to add a criteria now that will allow me to see just this one book. And I can figure out what patron it was and what book it was. Well, the criteria I'm going to add in this case is going to be that the date that it was checked in is going to be greater than the date that it was due. Now, I'm jumping a little bit ahead into probably a little bit more advanced workbook in this case, but in this case I'm comparing two fields. Now to compare two fields, I'm going to type in the name of the field, but we have to enclose the name of the field in square brackets here. So with the square brackets here, I'm going to type date due, and then close the square bracket. Okay, so my criteria in this case is the date that it's checked in is going to be greater than the due date. I'll go ahead and run the query, and there we have a couple of them here. We have one that was due in December of 23, wasn't checked in until January 2nd. We have one that was due in May 15th of 2023, and it didn't come in until 6/1. Okay, I'm happy with this query. I will use it again and again, and so I will go ahead and save it, and I'll save this query as patrons with late books. You can call it whatever you want. That just makes sense to me here. Okay, so we've created a couple of additional queries. And again, just to summarize here, when you create a query based on a related table, you instantly eliminate anybody in the related tables or any record in the related tables that do not have a related record in the related table. If we have multiple occurrences of the patron in the checkout history, they will show up multiple times. And we saw how that worked the first time we did it. Okay, thank you very much. Just look for the next video